there are a lot of people who are interested in the episcopacy, and that is the role of bishops in the church. A lot of us coming out of the United Methodist Church came to the conclusion that bishops are a problem. And so there have been a lot of people who want to leave the United Methodist Church and still be bound together in a denominational structure, but they don't want bishops to be at the top of that structure. There have been a number of people concerned with history and the Church Catholic and wanting to actually be a biblically constituted church who are of the mind that bishops are non-optional. So they've been more of the mind, okay, we have to have bishops, but what is the framework that actually allows us to have them without risking the same corruption that we saw in the United Methodist Church? I wasn't aware of it before reading Kevin Watson's history, but there's been a concern about the presence of bishops in the church long before the present crisis that was why the United Methodist Church split. I was reading on page 184, and this is Watson's Doctrine, Spirit, and Discipline of a history of the Wesleyan tradition in the United States. He's talking about, this is the chapter on the Wesleyan Methodists and the divisions of the Methodist Episcopal Church. And if you don't know your history, they split over slavery between North and South before the Civil War. And the group that split, so I didn't know this. Before that split, there was a split of abolitionists. There were 5 main leaders, and they split and made a denomination called the Wesleyan Methodist Connection, with an X, connection with an X. And here's what he has to say. Well, he has a prolonged section on him, but the section that deals with episcopacy. As we've seen several times already, it is instructive to note the reasons why names are chosen in the various denominations in the history of American Methodism. And the naming of the Wesleyan Methodist Connection is once again revealing. The Wesleyan Methodist Connection intentionally dropped Episcopal from its name because the new denomination would not have bishops. The word Episcopal was replaced with Wesleyan. Further, Wesleyan was placed at the front of the denomination's name. With this move, the founders of the Wesleyan Methodist Connection suggested there were variant and competing forms of Methodism. Their tribe, the Wesleyan Methodists, sought to be faithful to John Wesley's founding doctrine and discipline, concretely expressed by faithfulness to his explicit opposition to American slavery, which Wesley described as the vilest thing he ever saw under the sun. The other group, the Episcopal Methodists, had compromised their founders' doctrine and the discipline in order to preserve institutional unity. They advocated for peace for its own sake and thus compromised the church's purity. So you've got bishops representing institutional unity, and then you've got the purity of the church. And these two things are at odds. One more, I'll read a little bit more here because these are ideas that very much impact us today. The founders of the Wesleyan Methodist Connection unequivocally opposed slavery and the episcopacy, and these two went hand in hand for the denominational founders. They opposed the episcopacy because they viewed bishops as the ones who had abused their power in ways that protected slaveholders from ecclesiastical discipline. Bishops had also used their power to stifle abolitionists and keep their views from getting a fair hearing within the church itself. As the masthead of the True Wesleyan suggested, that's the publication that this denomination came up with, bishops had put pressure on abolitionists to keep the peace and not be divisive. Abolitionist Wesleyans' infidelity to their Wesleyan holiness roots valued purity or holiness above peace. They believed purity had come first, and then peace would follow. So it's a matter of priorities. And so, yes, we're called to be people of peace and to have peaceable connections, but if that comes at the cost of purity, then the cost is too high. So it's purity first, then unity and peace. So it was really interesting to me reading over this, seeing the same dynamics at play in the United Methodist Church, where you had these bishops that were valuing institutional unity over the purity of the church and allowed it to be co-opted by an alternative religion. So this is the concern that people have as they come to the GMC considering bishops. And so I want to make clear on the front end, I agree with those who make the case that bishops are essential to maintain a biblical model of the church. I don't think you can get rid of episcopal oversight, and every tribe that tries to, they just end up recreating the office with a different title, really. Or they just have a loose confederation of churches that are bound together by very little, really, which is not very compelling. That's obviously not the biblical image. So I think we have to have bishops, and then I feel like the thing that I'm pushing consistently that I want everybody to take very seriously is that it's not going to work without a radical understanding of the nature of transparency, the necessity of transparency. We have to have transparent access to what our bishops are doing and saying and writing and even thinking and praying about. And if people want to lead without being vulnerable to people like that, then to my mind, they just shouldn't lead. So, but if we do have leaders that are accountable and transparent and don't do things behind closed doors, then I think that is what is required for this moment and what has always really been required. That's, if you want to talk about the original bishop in the American church, that was Francis Asbury. And while he did have closed door meetings, the man really didn't have privacy. He didn't have his own house and retreat center that he went to. He was always in the public eye. He was always having public conversations. He was a man who was made bare to the world. And I think he is an excellent model of what a bishop should be, could be again. And so yesterday, the GMC put out a document detailing these 2-year bishop candidates. So we've got 9 candidates that have been recommended by their respective annual conferences. These are those 9. The article is called Transitional Leadership Council Nominates 9 persons for the office of 2-year bishop if proposed episcopacy legislation is adopted. And the very first thing you notice, or I notice, and I noticed it, Chris Ritter also noticed it whenever Leah Hitty Gregory, she's in the middle here, and Ryan Barnett, top left, were recommended. Whenever the 2-year bishop's plan was recommended by the TLC, it was quite explicit. These need to be people near the end of their career that are not going to serve as bishops afterwards. A lot of these do not fit in that category. There are some, a couple older, but a lot of these look like they could be in position to be bishops far longer than 2 years, which kind of goes against the explicit instructions. But how often do we comply with the explicit instructions? Let's read some of this. It's not this is more of a press release than an article. Launched on May 1st, 2022, the Global Methodist Church continues in a state of transition until duly elected delegates from around the world meet for its convening General Conference, September 20th through 26th this year, in San Jose, Costa Rica. In just over 2 years, 4,635 local churches have joined the GMC, and 31 provisional conferences have been organized to connect them together. The General Conference, the denomination's principal authoritative body, will consider a number of legislative matters. One of the important issues to be addressed is how the GMC will provide leadership at the general church level for its annual conferences and local congregations. The Transitional Leadership Council has proposed legislation that provides for bishops to be elected as general superintendents of the church. As part of the proposal, 2-year bishops will be elected to serve on a part-time basis from November 1st, 2024 until their successors are elected at the 2026 General Conference. The TLC has determined that 6 part-time 2-year bishops will be elected in 2024. These 6 2-year bishops, if elected, would join Bishops Scott Jones and Mark Webb, who would serve as full-time bishops for those 2 years. So I haven't checked the link here. When it says elected, does it go to the plan that was detailed by the TLC? Yes. So this is, if you want to know that plan, then you can look at that. I also saw this morning, if you go to peopleneedjesus.net, Chris Ritter's blog, you go to the GMC section, Jay Therrell, the former head of the WCA, now he's the president pro tempore of Florida, he and his conference have put together an alternate proposal to the TLC as to how it is that the GMC is going to have bishops. I haven't read through that, but apparently they have a PowerPoint presentation that he gave, and then they did a compare and contrast between what the TLC recommended and what the Floridians are recommending. So if you're at all interested in this kind of wonky stuff, then you are hereby endowed to go do your own research. So back to the release here. An alternative approach has been proposed by the delegates consideration that would not elect part-time 2-year bishops in 2024. It calls for waiting until 2026 to elect bishops to full 6-year terms. The delegates to the convening General Conference will debate and choose between the two proposed approaches. Okay, so I guess that's Jay Therrell's. The TLC invited all GMC members to submit by July 15th, 2024, the names of persons to create a diverse pool of potential nominees. 14 names were submitted. Only one name submitted was from outside the United States. Having determined that 6 persons would be elected, the TLC was tasked with nominating 9 individuals. So 14 were submitted, 9 were chosen, so that means that 5 didn't make the cut. On Monday, July 22nd, the TLC considered those 14 names and nominated the following persons listed in alphabetical order. And you'll notice it also has their provisional conference they're associated with. So we got Ryan Barnett, John Bayers. If you don't remember him, he was the one that was treated really badly by the North Georgia Annual Conference of the UMC and kicked out even though he did everything right. So then there's Kimba Ivereste from the DRC, Jeff Greenway, who's been a primary leader in the GMC from the beginning, Leah Hitta Gregory, you could say the same thing about her, Kenneth Livingston. I heard him preach for the first time at my annual conference this last summer. He was great. Carolyn Capers Moore, she's similar, has come to the Heartland, and she recently left her ministry position in her church, so she's positioned well to do this. Gregory Stover, I do not know, and Rob Townsend, I do not know. So I'll say more about this here in a bit, but let's finish this writing. Biographical statements prepared by each of these nominees may be viewed here. And so for those of you who are concerned about the quality of the people we're getting for this job, they generated this document, which each person generated their own bio, and some are very professional like this. Some are more easily accessible, and some are, they're all great. So for your consideration, you can go there. According to the TLC proposed legislation, the delegates to the 2024 convening General Conference may nominate additional candidates for the office of part-time 2-year bishops by providing a biographical statement for each additional candidate. Nominations must be received not less than 30 days before the start of the convening General Conference. They should be sent to Teresa Marcus to arrive not later than August 21st. So if you know of somebody that should be considered for this office, and that the ones here are lacking or just not as good as the person that you have in mind, I am not at all hinting I do not want to be bishop. I want to stay here. I like my little life in my little town. Don't mess with me. But if you have somebody, then you can submit their name to Teresa Marcus before then, and the will of the General Conference can go against the TLC. The TLC is taking leadership here, but that doesn't mean that they have effectively gated things off. You can provide other names for consideration, and the body of the General Conference can consider these names. If additional candidates are proposed, delegates will vote for up to 3 additional candidates to be added to the list of nominees presented by the TLC. Those additional candidates receiving a 2/3 majority vote of delegates present and casting valid ballots on a nominating ballot for additional nominees will be added to the list of nominees presented by the TLC. So that's the process by which the assembled body can be heard over the TLC. Should the TLC proposed episcopacy legislation be adopted, I appreciate that they are considering that it might not be, the delegates will elect 6 2-year bishops. To be elected, a person must receive 60% plus 1 vote of the delegates present and casting valid votes. Readers can learn more about the Global Methodist Church by exploring its general website. Now they can follow the details about the convening General Conference by visiting So the World Will Know. So they have a website just for the convening conference. And then they have some other stuff here at the bottom that I don't think we need to consider. So yesterday I went through the list of the 9 people, and most of them had email addresses on their profiles. So I sent an email to all of them. I was able to get the rest and invite them to come do interviews with me, where I'm not going to be, torching them and trying to do gotcha stuff. But I thought, how great would it be if when people go to general conference, this convening conference, they have a good sense of who each of the candidates is, and they can all make a really good informed vote on who they want to be their bishops. For better or for worse, a lot of people just are not willing to. Well, it's really hard with a one-page document to hold on to the different facts and make a real person out of that. But if you spend 45 minutes or an hour with a person having a conversation with somebody else, that really gives you a good sense of what they're about and how they operate and what their concerns are. And my hope is that all 9 say yes, and that we get to have conversations about what we love about our Wesleyan heritage and tradition, what it is that we imagine for the GMC going into the future, how it is they imagine serving for the next 2 years. And I think that could be really great for the church. So I've reached out to all 9 of them. And then I've also considered we've got 31 provisional conferences at this point, and making sure to interview the leadership of those conferences between now and the general conference. Just kind of give a sense for who all's in leadership and what kind of vision they have for what the GMC is doing. I know not everybody who watches Plain Spoken is tied to the GMC, but I think even so, it can be really helpful to look at different models for how different tribes do things. I think we can all learn from one another. And as I said to my guys in my men's discipleship group last night, I think that we're not supposed to reinvent the wheel. There is nothing new under the sun. We're not going to come up with any new doctrine, nor should we. But we can learn from those who've practiced the Christian faith differently at different times. And there are a lot of things that make sense to us today, but they don't work. And if you read your history, you see where it's been tried and why it doesn't work. And then there are a lot of things that did work in the past. And by work, I don't mean grew the church necessarily, but made faithful disciples. There are certain things that have worked in the past that we can learn from. And so I think in the future, what I'd like to do is help paint portraits of different religious traditions that can learn from one another, be in dialogue together, and then eventually have more of a sense of like, okay, here's these points in history where the Holy Spirit has clearly been present and God has been glorified, and perhaps we can live that out intentionally together now rather than fighting about whose vision today is better. Like, I'm just not interested in that. I don't like the tug of war between my conscience and yours, or so-and-so's agenda and another's. I just think the agenda is Christ, obviously. The church belongs to him, and that whatever the Bible clearly says and the Holy Spirit is clearly leading to, that's what we should do. And the episcopacy is part of that. So watch the GMC, what we do. Hopefully we make good, sober, faithful decisions this summer. This September. September's not summer. And then, as I said at the very beginning of this segment, my agenda is transparency. And so I hope that regardless of whoever we get in the bishop's seat, that we maintain a cultural norm. I don't really care so much about what's on paper, although let's try and get that right. I care about the culture of the GMC being such that we expect all leaders to be accountable and vulnerable, and to maintain a state of transparency so that we don't have to suspect them. So I would invite you to say that prayer with me for the future of the GMC.